Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. This is Larry Johnson, your host, for another episode of Principles Voices Podcast. And I'm really delighted to have as my guest today, Joe Mazzu. Hello, Joe.
Hello, Larry.
So I know you wrote this wonderful book that you sent me. I've got it right here. Um, The Lessons Donors Teach Us, Memorable Episodes in Donor-Centric Fundraising. This has your full name, Joe G. Mazzu the third. I should have had that there. Okay.
Yeah.
So anyway, I guess the first thing I want to ask you is, what prompted you to write this book?
I retired from a wonderful, almost 20, just shy of 20-year assignment, I call it, at a nonprofit here in Houston, Texas, back in 2015. And Larry, right after that, I took some time. I knew it was a transition, so to speak, where I wasn't going to be doing full-time development work, advancement work, fundraising. And I knew that I had a chance now to reflect. And so beginning around 2016, I began to write down my memories of episodes that I had with donors. And over that 20-year tenure, as I like to say, I was under the tutelage of thousands of benefactors and supporters and contributors. And the philosophy of our nonprofit was that we practice donor-centric fundraising, and that we would respect the donors' intentions, their interest, their passions, their philosophies, their perspectives from the start of our cultivation phase, perhaps that's how we would call it, having a relationship that it's preceded by all of this relationship building, really wanting to understand the donor. And at that point, to be open as the fundraiser to learn from the donor, even as they would either say, yes, we want to help you with this project or program or whatever, or if they would say no, or maybe they would say not yet. And to always approach those moments with an openness to learn from them. Now, that is easily said. And so is this concept of relationship building in fundraising, right? Relational fundraising. Is that the term you've used in 8 Principles? Something like that?
It's interesting you bring that up because, yes, I have used it for a while. I'm now going to be starting to get away from it. And here's why. Not because I've stopped believing in it. It's because it's being emulated, or should I say copied, by a lot of people who, shall we say, interpret it a little differently. I had someone say to me, oh, yes, I'm a relational fundraiser. I'm polite. I know how to do pleasantries. Well, that's not what I had in mind. So
that's not what I don't have that in mind either.
Well, I know
so
that.
I'm glad you're clarifying this. Yeah.
For me, it's you're building a relationship in a way so the donors can get to know you and you can get to know them. That's really what we're talking about here.
And with that said, let me just interject, because if we can, because I know there's a kindred spirit going on here, but what you just said about it's a two-way dynamic.
Mm-hmm.
You use the term in 8 Principles where you have this opportunity of a lifetime to create a moment, a particular moment in which value is added to that donor
Hmm.
where their aspirations are affirmed, where their dreams come true, where their hopes are realized in their lifetime. And so this concept that is how I went into these moments, or these relationship framed uh, moments with donors. I began to reflect on it after the retirement, and I began to write essays, short ones, not long, in which I let those memories come back up to the surface, and the essence of what was happening. And this is what I'd like to talk with you about today. What was really happening as the donors were teaching me lessons is that they were adding value to my uh, vocational journey as a development professional. They were developing me, they were shaping me. The lessons they were teaching me, whether they knew it or not, I didn't forget them. And I had to reflect on it. And so the writing exercise, the discipline of saying, I will write about this, I will not suppress this, because some of the episodes did not end well, so to speak. Some of the dimensions of these moments were humiliating. They were embarrassing. Some were humorous. I mean, I look back on them now and I chuckle deeply, saying, how in the world did I keep a straight face? But all of them were humbling. And by that, I mean, if we believe that a donor can add value to our lives, not just add a donation to the nonprofit or the mission or the agency, not just financial support, but actually they begin to shape you and your understanding
Oh, yes.
of
Oh, yes.
life, of generosity, of all that. So that's why I wrote the book. And I must tell you, I've read yours. It's lovely,
Well, thank you. Thank you.
but it's on one of those first pages where you talk about that board member who was a Marine, a former Marine, and he was a generous man, evidently felt compelled and deputized, so to speak, to go and ask a very generous person in your community or his community,
Yeah.
an older person, but a citizen that was esteemed. And she probably knew why he was coming, but he gets into that situation, and you describe beautifully on one of your first pages where all of a sudden this very confident man, this accomplished person, found himself almost paralyzed by a fear, because he was about to ask this lady for a very large sum of money, and he cast his eyes down. Am I saying this correctly, Larry? And he didn't look her in the eye, and just riddled with anxiety. And then she stops him and says, look up at me. If you're going to ask me for a gift that size, I want you to look at me in the eye. And that story, that episode, I'm sure if you would go back, or if I would go back and interview him, I would say, what? In addition to anxiety, what other emotions, or what physically, how are you dealing with that? I'm sure he could have afterwards said, that was rough. That was a rough patch. I don't think I'll ever do that again. Being put in my place by the donor. I don't think I ever want to pursue this. I don't want to pursue it further. Or he would perhaps slept it off, or as Dr. Roy Menninger, and I found the article, pal, who wrote this article back in 1991. And he said that the toll, the emotional, the spiritual, the intellectual, the psychological toll, the physical toll that fundraisers go through is never broached, never talked about. And so when you put that in your book, Larry, I said, I want to talk about that with Larry. Dr. Menninger says, if we don't talk about it, if we suppress it, it's going to pop up later on. if it's not resolved in a way where you can make friends with it, make friends with that emotion, make friends with that rejection, make friends with the moment in which you are caught off guard by a donor. So in the book, in my little book, it's a little book, you've seen it, it's 20 little stories, short stories, where I let the reader just glance over my shoulder as I'm living this real time with a donor or with a group of donors or with a philanthropic committee or with the trustees of a foundation. And Larry, I got to be honest with you. I struggled as I wrote these essays. I said, do I really tell the truth? Or do I lean into what Dr. Menninger said? You've got to let these thoughts and feelings be processed. So in the book, The Lessons Donors Teach Us, they were memorable episodes. I never forgot them. It's been almost, in some cases, 30 years since some of these things happened.
Yeah.
But here's what I want to ask. How do we, as fundraisers, advancement professionals, people in the development world, if we really commit ourselves to relational fundraising, clarified by you that it really is it's more than being polite, minding your manners. It's truly opening yourself up.
Mm-hmm.
You've asked the donor to open themselves up, and now you better be ready, buddy. If you really believe in that type of fundraising, to receive whatever's coming your way from the donor, thus the lessons they teach us. And so in the book, I talk about being absolutely humiliated, embarrassed, put on the spot, talked down to by a donor. I've been threatened by a donor. Don't you ever bring that up again. When I'll stop giving to your nonprofit. I've been lied to by donors. I tell an episode where worked a whole year on behalf of the nonprofit with this philanthropist go-between. And it was a rather significant gift. It had a file the size of an old-time telephone book filled with notes, phone messages, dates and times of meetings with this go-between. And everything was absolutely ready to go, down to the faxing in the day of the signed agreement from this philanthropist. And as you probably read in the story, his signature was on page 3. His secretary was talking to me on the phone. We got it. We looked it over. Everything was ready to go. And I just sighed. It was a sigh of relief. It's done. 5 minutes later, or just a little bit, get the call from the same. It's canceled. My boss knows nothing about this. That's a lie. Now, how do we process when a donor reneges on a pledge? How do we process second guessing ourselves, even with all of our formulas? And we need to go into relational moments with donors with steps in our mind. Have we done everything? Have we done our due diligence? Mm-hmm. But man, Larry, when even the formulas don't work, and we're left with a surprise that just takes our breath away. So that's why I wrote the book. I didn't want to keep that to myself. I didn't want to say, yes, those things happen, but I'll tell you why. Because those episodes did shape me, and they informed my understanding of philanthropy. And I hope over the 20 years I was in this wonderful nonprofit that every one of those lessons came into play. They accrued the value that those donors gave to me, enhanced my life with, did make me
Let me
better.
mention the book.
Yeah.
Again.
Sorry for being long-winded, but you asked.
Let me mention the book again. It's The Lessons Donors Teach Us. Memorable Episodes in Donor-Centric Fundraising. And if you're listening or viewing us in the video form, the cover looks like this, and it's available from Amazon. So I encourage you to check it out. It's a very eminently readable volume. I found it very informative as well as entertaining, Joe, which is something that I think speaks well of it. If you can inform and entertain at the same time, that's good. One thing that came through in your discussion is the need to be not only genuine but be open and vulnerable to a donor. That's the only way they'll be vulnerable
Oh,
to
yeah.
you. And on that note, there's a book that you may, it's very recent. It's the new book by David Brooks, which is How to Know a Person. And this is a book I do
Yeah.
believe most fundraisers should be reading if they haven't already, because he talks about the way to get to know someone and
Oh, yeah.
the concept of the illuminator, as he calls it in there, and then the questions that are asked by the illuminator. But they're not your
Mhm.
typical what do you do, what school did you go to, none of that sort of thing, because that tends to put people on notice. It tends to make them like you're judgmental in some way. You really have to open-ended questions which allow it to go
Mhm.
a lot of different directions, and then if you're opened that way, then people will indeed open up to you, but you got to be prepared for the unexpected. um, and he actually uses a line in here that I have used more than once. When you get something that's really, really unexpected for you, that just kind of comes at you in a way you weren't expecting it, and maybe it's something that you don't particularly agree with, you don't want to engage that in any sort of judgmental way. It doesn't solve anything. You're not going to convince the person. So instead, he makes the proposal, which I have used before. The response is, you know, I've never thought of it that way before, which is a couple
Exactly.
of things. It's a very honest answer. You've never thought of it that way before. Parenthetically, maybe you never would think of it that way, but that's beside the point. And it says to the person who just spoke it that you listened to them. I
Yeah.
heard what you said, you see. And he talks a lot about not interrupting donors when they're talking, or people in general, and they begin to open up to you. Um,
Mhm.
so but in this world we live in, where it's become sort of what the I call it the major giving has now become the nonprofit version of the insurance business. You're selling one policy at a time and going on to the next prospect. And once the policy is sold, done, next person kind of thing, and you get your little residual and that's it. So that's unfortunately the way a lot of things have gone. You want to take one story and tell us here in the next few minutes? Kind of tease someone who might want
Sure.
to read the
Oh,
book?
yeah. I'll
Just
tease someone. Oh gosh, they're, to me, I'm biased, of course, but they all have equal weight, even the funny ones. We'll take a funny one real quick. This is the second little one in the book.
well, that'll
It's
help too.
called After the Awkward Decline. Yeah, After the Awkward Decline. And it's a story. It's got a little Texas flavor to it because in the day before Casual Fridays took over, uh, trustees and development professionals wore suits and
Suits, not
freshly
sport.
starched and ironed
Suits,
shirts and
not sport
ties. And
jackets, Joe.
yep,
Suits, not
suit.
sport jackets.
That's right,
Suits.
not sports suits. Tailored. This guy had one on, and I talk about his cufflinks and his the the pocket square. I mean, he had the handkerchief coming out, and this was in the day. That's how it happened, and he had requested to come to our campus. They had just finished their trustee meeting, and this was something we had worked so hard on this proposal, and really we did our job. Okay, we even had some pretty well-known people in the country lending their endorsements, and we thought it was fait accompli. It was done, and the ma'am said, I want to come by, stop by on Friday morning, and I want you to take me on a tour of your campus with the programs. So long story short, he appears, we meet him, the delegation meets him in the lobby, and he is dressed fit to kill. think he even had cowboy boots on because in Houston, Texas in the day,
Well, it's
that's how.
Texas. It's
Yeah,
Texas.
but it was his tie though that was just so out of bounds for me, and it just I caught my eye, and I couldn't. I was fixated. What this doesn't fit, and it was rather garish and kind of loud. But long story short, in my mind, I'm going, "This is wow. The man is coming here. He's going to present us with the check. We're going to get it right here in the lobby, and that's why he's here." And we were smiling at each other, and there was a pause. He was smiling at me, and he says, "I just want you to know, our trustees think so highly of what you folks do here. We're real fans of this mission. Unfortunately, we will not be making this grant, giving you this grant. Now, let's get started, and I want to see the programs." I was staring right at his tie. You even have the tie clip. What do you do? That's not what we thought he was going to say. Well, the indicators were this was a moment that he was looking forward to present us with this long sought after grant support. And I glanced at my colleagues to my right and left. It was just like a punch in the gut. And at that moment, the decorum of the moment says, "Just be honest." And we said, "Oh, this isn't the response we expected, but we thank you for considering the request. Let's take the tour." And off we went. And it was a grand tour, and it was a wonderful tour. We ended the tour with a nice, delicious lunch. The particular nonprofit I was serving in the day had and still has a restaurant that is run by the program participants. It's fabulous. Had lovely table talk. We were minding our manners, so to speak. He was enjoying every minute of it, and we bid him farewell. And as I say in the little story, we bid his flashy tie farewell. We hook it back to the office, and the post-mortem began. We were going, I'll read it. "How on earth did this happen?" we said in the circle. "What could we have done better? Why did the foundation really decline our request? Who could find out for us? Where did we get the idea that this was a slam dunk? Right? When can we resubmit?" And on we went until it was time to call it a day and call it a week. And in a little short story, as Dr. Menninger would probably say, "Well done, Joe, that you put these last paragraphs in your short story." I did some retail therapy, right? I go to a department store that weekend. They had a sale on ties. The very thing that was a blow to me, this man who said no to us was wearing this rather garish, gaudy tie. And I bought 5 ties on sale that Saturday. They were beautifully bright and beautifully designed. They were on sale. I keep saying that. I wore those ties the next week. Monday was one tie, Tuesday was another one, Wednesday, Thursday. Everybody got a chuckle out of it. And that was the processing for me at that moment. And as my last little sentence in that short story says, let me read it. It says, "And along the way, after that awkward decline and without skipping our beat, we kept writing and submitting proposals." And that was an awkward decline for me.
Yes,
The years rolled on. Sometimes the responses were what we worked, hoped, and prayed for, and sometimes not, for understandable reasons and for unexplainable reasons. And along the way, I accumulated quite a collection of neckties with a story to match each one. And so if we as development professionals realize that our soul is being developed with every yes and every no, with every maybe, with every fantastic grant finally consummated, and the glorious celebration, and for every pledge that has been reneged, and we are sitting in the office by ourselves thinking, how in the world did that happen? He lied to me for a year. If we don't have a mechanism built in to our soul, our mind, our bodies, even, as Dr. Menninger said, if you don't process it. So the stories, again, they're so simple, but they're as honest as I could write them. And where there was humor, I put it in there. They were all humbling. I really believe humility is what shapes the contours of your vocation.
Mhm.
If you're teachable, if you're open, if you're malleable on the good days, the not so good days, you will take those lessons and you will use them. And you will remember them for all those about to retire after storied careers in this field. Do what Larry continues to do, which is right. If it's just you and your pen and or your computer and you're typing away, is just get it out. And so that act of remembering it, assigning value to it, because even if the donor didn't know they were adding value to you in that moment, it weighs something. And it's better to own up to it and own it and embrace it. And with as much retrospect as 10 years or 20 or 30 years can give, to cherish it for Pete's sakes and share it with others. No telling what those folks are going to learn who read this book. They'll have moments too.
Well, thank you. So what's next for you? I mean, now you've written the book, you've had you're not on the porch yet, Joe. So what's next for you? You want to give us a peek?
I'm writing another one, and this one is more of a memoir in which I talk time of my life of working what I consider a very noble and honorable profession, being a development professional in the nonprofit sector. But I fell into it backwards. I call it
Most of us do.
almost divine free fall. It was not in my plans. And I think there's a lot of what I call nonprofit neophytes out there, people who've been attracted to this journey of service to others, who might gain some wisdom from a guy who I didn't get a degree in this. This was not what my degrees were in. I know today you can go to some of the premier universities in the country and get
I
diplomas that say you've been trained, but
I wonder the value of some of those because there's no there's no substitute for doing it as opposed to learning about it.
Yeah, and that's what this next little book, the next little book will just tell again through perhaps just first person narratives. This is really like.
Mm-hmm.
And this was what, year 5 and year 10, year 17. And towards the end, when you knew this work, this chapter is ready to close. And so that's on the front burner now with this one out of me and in circulation. So I really appreciate this today. Thank you for having me on.
Well, it's my pleasure. Is there anything you'd like to add? Anything I haven't touched on that you'd like to contribute?
I've been surprised, to be honest with you, with the responses from my peers who are getting the book and reading it. And some of them are really, they're blowing me sideways. Had one person who he's pretty well known in the field, and his company, he also has a consulting company, but he says, Joe, this was an absolute fun read. I've been in this for 40 years and I'm buying copies for all of our consultants because I just want them to be reminded of the bumps and the beauty of this profession. And then he said, if there's institutional heads or board members or staff members of nonprofits that have not a clue, or not that so much as in the heads of companies or uh, businesses or just other sectors, they have not a clue what a development professional does. He says, reading this little book, we could use it as a tool to educate them, to give them an idea. So yeah, uh, I'd like to say, I hope others who are interested in this type of book would seek it out. It's on Amazon. Thank you for letting me plug it. And I hope they would also be encouraged and they would write their own stories, get it out. Uh, if it's just for your own well-being, and let that discipline, as Menninger says, just don't suppress it. Let every emotion on the spectrum that comes with this noble profession be acknowledged. Uh, Look back on it and weigh it for what it is, and then and cherish it. And I do cherish it. So I'm glad I was able to do it.
Thank
Thanks, Larry.
Well, it's my pleasure, Joe. This is a delightful little book, and you can read it, I guess, if you're really in a couple of hours, if you're very focused. Um, as I said, it is on Amazon. I was You were very kind and generous to gift me a copy, and I'm really thrilled with that. Although I do have one point to point out to you. You did not inscribe it to me. You know. What am I going to say? Oh, well, anyway, ladies and gentlemen, I've been having a delightful discussion with Joe Mazzu, the author of The Lessons Donors Teach Us, sort of a lifelong guy in the business who learned it the right way, the hard way, the way that keeps you alert, and gives you that
Uh-huh.
respect for people that you really have to be successful. So I want to thank you, Joe, very
You're
much.
welcome.
Next time, ladies and gentlemen, we'll do another episode like this, another very interesting character who's doing interesting things. Until then,